It flew like a fighter and landed like nothing I'd ever seen. That line belongs to Major Guy Townsend, one of the first men to take the B-47 off the runway at Moses Lake, Washington. He meant it literally. The bomber accelerated so fast on its December 1947 test flights that chase planes couldn't keep up. A bomber, outrunning fighters. Look at the thing. 6 jet engines hung in pods under wings swept back 35 degrees, a configuration stolen directly from captured German wind tunnel data at Peenemünde. Nothing on Earth had ever looked like this. Not a bomber, not any airplane flying. The wings flexed 17 feet at the tips under load. The landing gear ran on a bicycle arrangement. 2 main trucks fore and aft under the fuselage, with tiny outrigger wheels on the inboard engine pods to keep the whole machine from tipping over on the ramp like a drunk leaning against a lamppost. If you know something about this airplane I haven't gotten to yet, drop it in the comments, subscribe if you want the full story, and hit like when I tell you something that surprises you, because I will. Boeing engineer George Scherer had seen those German swept-wing reports in May of 1945, weeks before the war ended. He wrote a letter, an actual handwritten letter, back to Seattle from Europe, telling the aerodynamics team to throw out the straight-wing design they'd been working on and start over. They did. 2 years later, the prototype flew, and every engineer in the American aviation industry understood immediately that the entire future of jet transport had just changed shape. The B-47 Stratojet became the direct ancestor of the Boeing 707. Same swept wing, same podded engines slung below and forward of the leading edge, same basic structural philosophy, same lateral stabilization approach. Every commercial airliner you have ever boarded traces its configuration to a nuclear bomber designed to penetrate Soviet airspace at 506 knots. Boeing built 2,032 of them. The Strategic Air Command filled its wings with B-47s from 1951 through the early 1960s. At peak strength, 28 bomb wings flew the Stratojet, more than any other jet bomber in American history, before or since. The airframe carried a single massive thermonuclear weapon in its bomb bay, refueled from KC-97 tankers at 25,000 feet, and could reach targets deep inside the Soviet Union on one-way missions that everybody understood meant the crews probably weren't coming home. The crews not coming home. That was true long before any war started. The B-47 killed over 200 airmen in peacetime, training flights, routine missions. Structural failures at altitude, compressor stalls on takeoff, crashes on landing in crosswinds the bicycle gear couldn't handle. The airplane that invented modern aviation also invented a new kind of institutional silence around acceptable losses. So why build something this dangerous? Because in 1945, the United States owned exactly one delivery system for nuclear weapons, the B-29. Slow, propeller-driven, vulnerable to any jet interceptor the Soviets could field. And the Soviets, who detonated their first atomic bomb in August 1949, 4 years ahead of CYA estimates, were fielding jet interceptors fast. The MiG-15 entered squadron service that same year. A B-29 flying at 350 knots above 30,000 feet had become, almost overnight, a target. Curtis LeMay understood this before most of Washington did. He took command of Strategic Air Command in October 1948 and found a force he later described as unable to fight its way out of a paper bag. Crews couldn't hit their targets in exercises. Maintenance rates bordered on criminal. LeMay ran a maximum effort simulated bombing mission against Dayton, Ohio, and not a single crew achieved a passing score. Not one. He needed an airplane that could fly high enough and fast enough to survive Soviet air defenses long enough to put a weapon on target. He needed it yesterday. Boeing almost didn't give it to him. The original Model 432 design from 1944 featured straight wings and 4 jet engines, essentially a jet-powered B-29. Wind tunnel tests showed mediocre performance. The Army Air Forces shrugged and kept funding it anyway, because nobody had anything better. Then, Scherer's letter arrived from Germany. The swept-wing data from Hermann Göring's Aerodynamic Research Institute at Braunschweig changed everything Boeing's team thought they knew about high-speed flight. A wing angled 35 degrees back, delayed compressibility effects, pushed the critical Mach number higher, let the airframe fly closer to the speed of sound, without the buffeting and loss of control that killed test pilots in straight-wing jets. The physics worked on paper. Nobody had ever built a large aircraft around them. Boeing's chief aerodynamicist, George Scherer, and project engineer Bob Withington redesigned the bomber 6 times between 1945 and 1947. Each iteration swept the wings further, moved the engines from the fuselage to underwing pods, a decision driven partly by aerodynamics and partly by fear. Jet engines in 1946 caught fire with uncomfortable regularity. Hanging them away from the fuel tanks and the crew compartment meant a burning engine might not take the whole airplane with it. Practical thinking dressed up as elegant engineering. The $33.5 million development contract, roughly $390 million in today's dollars, bought 3 prototypes. The B-47 first flew on December 17, 1947, 44 years to the day after the Wright brothers left the sand at Kitty Hawk. Boeing's test pilots Robert Robbins and Scott Osler reported handling qualities unlike any multi-engine aircraft in existence. The swept wings gave the Stratojet a roll rate that startled everyone. The thing banked like a fighter and climbed like something half its weight. LeMay watched the flight test reports come in and saw exactly what he needed. A bomber that could outrun the MiG-15 at altitude, penetrate Soviet radar coverage at speed, deliver a thermonuclear weapon, and maybe get home. The maybe part didn't bother him. What bothered him was that Boeing couldn't build them fast enough. Colonel Michael McCoy taxied a production B-47B onto the runway at MacDill Air Force Base in March 1953, advanced 6 throttles, and lit the JATO bottles. 18 rocket-assisted takeoff units strapped to the belly ignited simultaneously, 33,000 pounds of additional thrust for 14 seconds. The smell hit ground crews 200 yards away. Burnt cordite and kerosene, acrid enough to taste on the back of your tongue. The airplane needed every pound of that push. Gross takeoff weight ran to 206,000 pounds, nearly double the B-29's maximum. Wing loading hit 127 pounds per square foot, compared to 69 for the B-29. Approach speed, 230 knots. The B-29 came in at 120. Watch what that approach speed means in practical terms. A B-47 on final covered 385 feet every second. A pilot who flared 1 second late hit the runway at a descent rate that collapsed the landing gear. A pilot who flared 1 second early floated past the touchdown zone and ran out of concrete. The margin between a good landing and a fatal one shrank to something a human nervous system could barely process. The Convair B-36, SAC's other nuclear bomber, landed at a leisurely 110 knots. Its pilots transitioned from propeller trainers without much trouble. B-47 pilots transitioned from nothing, because nothing like the Stratojet existed. The Air Force had no 2-seat swept-wing jet trainer until the T-33, a straight-wing airplane that handled nothing like the bomber it supposedly prepared men to fly. Between 1951 and 1965, 203 B-47 crew members died in accidents. That number comes from Air Force safety records, though several researchers put it higher, noting that some crashes in classified mission profiles never entered the standard database. The records for at least 4 incidents remain sealed. 203 men killed by an airplane they flew in peacetime, defending a country that never told their families the details. The Air Force called this an acceptable rate. McCoy died in a B-47 crash in 1957. They named the base after him. Captain Harold Keener held the B-47 at 40,000 feet over Kansas and felt the controls go soft. Not dramatically, just a narrowing, like the airplane quietly running out of room. At that altitude, the margin between stall speed and maximum Mach number compressed to roughly 10 knots. Fly slower, the wings quit. Fly faster, compressibility effects pitched the nose down into a dive no pilot had ever recovered from. Crews called it coffin corner. You could feel the airplane trying to kill you, Keener wrote later in a squadron safety brief. Not violently, patiently. Turbulence at Coffin Corner didn't just bounce the airframe. A gust that gained or lost 15 knots of airspeed put the airplane instantly outside its survivable envelope. Stall or mock tuck, pick your death. And the jet stream over the continental United States routinely produced gusts of 30 knots or more at those altitudes. SAC knew this. SAC sent crews there anyway, because Soviet radar couldn't track them reliably above 38,000 feet. So what killed more B-47 crews, Coffin Corner or the landing? The answer depends on which years you count. Early models with the J-47 engines suffered compressor stalls on takeoff that dropped thrust to zero on one or more engines at the worst possible moment. Low altitude, maximum weight, JATO bottles already spent. Later models with the J-33 fixed the compressor problem but added weight, which raised approach speeds further. The landing problem never went away. 403 B-47s destroyed in major accidents. 203 crew killed, minimum. Exposed to those numbers, the Air Force did something it almost never does. It admitted the airplane demanded more than standard training could provide and built an entire new pipeline around the Stratojet. Too late for the men already in the ground. Right on time for the ones who came after. We designed a bomber, George Scherer told a Boeing engineering symposium in 1967. We accidentally designed the future of civil aviation. He wasn't exaggerating. Look at the Boeing 707, the airplane that made commercial jet travel ordinary. Swept wings at 35 degrees, engines and pods slung beneath the wings on pylons. Flexible wing structure, designed to bend under load rather than resist it. Every one of those features flew first on the B-47. Boeing didn't adapt the Stratojet's aerodynamics for the 707. They copied them because the B-47 had already paid the tuition in blood and titanium and taxpayer dollars. The podded engine configuration alone saved the commercial aviation industry a decade of development. Hanging engines off the wing solved three problems simultaneously. It moved fire risk away from passengers. It provided structural counterweight that reduced wing bending moments. It let mechanics swap an engine on the ramp without disassembling the fuselage, and it simplified future redesigns around higher bypass turbofans. Every Airbus, every Boeing, every commercial widebody flying today uses this layout. The design originated in a 1946 meeting where Boeing engineers decided they'd rather lose an engine to fire than lose an entire bomber. 2,042 B-47s built, 403 destroyed in accidents, a loss rate of roughly 19.7%. Peacetime, no enemy fire, just the physics of an airplane that flew faster than its crews could think. SAC flew the Stratojet on continuous airborne alert, refueling missions over the Arctic, electronic intelligence flights along the Soviet border. The Soviets tracked everyone. They built the SA-2 surface-to-air missile system specifically to kill high-altitude bombers, flying straight and level at the speeds and altitudes the B-47 owned. The SA-2 worked. On May 1, 1960, one of them knocked Gary Powers and his U-2 out of the sky over Sverdlovsk at 70,000 feet. The Soviets had solved the high-altitude problem. SAC's response shifted bombers to low-level penetration profiles, terrain following under the radar. The B-47 couldn't do that. Its wings, designed for high-altitude cruise, flexed dangerously in the turbulence below 1,000 feet. The airplane that forced the Soviets to build the SA-2 became obsolete the moment the SA-2 proved it worked. The Soviets spent 15 years and billions of rubles perfecting a defense against an airplane. The Americans quietly retired in 1969. By then, Boeing had already moved the Stratojet's DNA into the 707, the 727, the 737, the 747. The bomber died. Its aerodynamics multiplied into the most commercially successful aircraft family in history. Harold Keener, the captain who felt the controls go soft over Kansas, who described the airplane trying to kill him patiently, survived his tour. He left SAC in 1961, took a job with Trans World Airlines, and spent 22 years flying 707s and 727s across the Atlantic. The swept wings were the ones he knew, the podded engines, the aerodynamics, all of it proven on the airframe that killed 203 of his colleagues. He retired to Tucson in 1983. Last public record has him volunteering at the Pima Air and Space Museum, walking past a restored B-47 on static display 5 days a week.